Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
A quick warning, today's episode includes discussion about sexual assault. It may not be appropriate for young listeners. Chris, in the years since we've been alive, how much would you say technology has shifted or improved?
Yeah, this is a lot for me kind of answer. I think about the incredible number of changes that have happened like across the board from, not only what we do here on a work level, particularly let's just say in news, everybody has a camera in their pocket now. There's so much stuff that we see because of everyone else out there. Yeah. Whereas it didn't used to be like that. You have to go out and get that stuff for your own, on your own as the news. And just one other one here is think about Zoom interviews, right? When the pandemic hit, that was something that the entire world seemed to shift to, these face-to-face meetings. We do a lot of our interviews on Zoom now because the reality is we'd rather talk to somebody in person, like say in Farmington, rather than having to drive 3 hours out to go and interview them in person or just over the phone. So that's just one of many elements I could go on about. But yes.
Video at your fingertips is definitely a shift that we've seen in our lifetime. We always say, act like you're always being recorded, right? Yep. Because you probably are in some form of fashion. So there are many advances I think we can talk about, but I think it kind of ties into our topic today because we've covered a lot of crime as journalists here, and with improvements in, how evidence is collected, DNA analysis, and just what technology and resources are out there as far as evidence gathering abilities, I think it's really impressive to see some decades-old cases be solved due to this advancement in technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to note, though, even though we have those advancements, you, of course, still need people working in laboratories testing that DNA. You need the money to do that. There's also preserving that evidence and carefully handling it in line with the rules that are sort of in order for the court system in order to take that case to trial.
Yeah, in order for all of it to work, there's people definitely at the helm of that, particularly in sexual assault cases, which we're talking about today. We've seen a backlog in Bernalillo and Santa Fe counties with untested rape kits that we've covered in the news here at KRQE. These are kits of evidence usually a medical professional collects after someone goes to the hospital and reports a sexual assault. They're crucial in cases like this. But before we get into more details about that, let's introduce today's guest. She is Haley Murphy, a deputy district attorney in the Violent Crime Special Victims Unit for the 1st Judicial District, which includes Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, and Los Alamos counties. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. First, let's just get to know you a little bit. Tell us about yourself. What's your career background? What led you to your current position in the DA's office in Santa Fe?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally from Roswell, so born and raised in New Mexico. After law school, I came back and I started working in Albuquerque, first for a judge for a little while, and then at the 2nd Judicial District Attorney's Office in the Crimes Against Children Unit. When I went to law school, I thought I'd never be in a courtroom. I didn't care. I wanted to do policy. I wanted to be up on the Hill. And in my 3rd year of law school, I worked in a clinical program, in part working with a little boy who'd been hurt by a school resource officer in a public school in Washington, D.C. And during the course of that, I realized I can get kids to talk to me. And so I started at the Crimes Against Children Unit in 2014, more or less. And that's just what I've been doing ever since. I got about 60 felony trials, maybe more at this point, under my belt, hundreds of cases that I've touched over the years, and I have a real passion for working with children and sexual assault survivors.
Yeah, not to be undersold as a trait, talking to kids is a really difficult thing. I think we have even just experienced it on a really simple level as news reporters. You go and ask a kid, what do you think about this? Did you like it? And they say, yeah. There are a lot of kids that they just kind of clam up, so it's a really important skill to have, especially in your line of work.
No, yeah, getting details from kids can be interesting, and kids recall and narrate very differently than we as adults do. So it can be a challenge, but can also be a really fun kind of puzzle to unfold. Yeah. Kids are also overwhelmingly honest. So as we've all seen, if you go home and ask your child, "Do I look nice today?" and they're like, "No, mommy, no," and you're That's humbling. Thanks, kid. So
do you have a kid?
I do. I'm a mom of a little boy.
Okay.
He's 3.
We are both parents of young children as well, so
Indeed.
it's definitely humbling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it sure is.
Well, broadly speaking, because we'll get into, I think, the details here in just a minute, but just to say broadly, how challenging is it to prosecute and handle the cases that you work with?
They're extremely challenging. They have one of the lower conviction rates nationwide compared to other types of crimes. That's often because we have less physical evidence. There's fewer witnesses to sexual assaults compared to, say, a murder or a bank robbery or something like that. So they're extremely challenging cases to prove. As technology develops, as there's more expertise in the field and more understanding of how these crimes kind of unfold and how people can recall what's happened to them. Of course, there's advances that make things easier, but they are some of the, if not the most challenging cases to prosecute.
So someone comes forward with an allegation. Let's say a child reports something to their parent. The parents then report to police. Evidence is usually collected. Statements are taken. All of this before a prosecutor sees the case. What tools in the system are you counting on at that point to be able to take the case in front of a judge or a jury and hold someone accountable in the justice system? Can you just walk us through what happens when someone reports a sexual assault?
Sure. First and foremost, the most important tool is a believing and protective adult. If a child makes a disclosure to you, the most important thing you can do is ask minimal questions and then report it. We don't always see that, and that can really, really undercut the viability of a case. After a police report is made, children are usually interviewed. It's called a forensic interview. In Albuquerque or Santa Fe, it would be at All Faiths Receiving Home or at Solace Crisis Center. And it's a specialized interview to help kids feel safe and to be able to give truthful, an open dialogue about what they've gone through. The other key partners or multidisciplinary team members we'd rely on would be a sexual assault nurse examiner, if that's appropriate and warranted in the case. And of course our law enforcement partners to do a thorough and complete investigation, finding any opportunity to corroborate what the child or a survivor, an adult survivor, is disclosing. Once the investigation is complete, it hits my desk or my colleague's desk, and we can screen it for viability. We have an ethical duty to only bring cases forward that have a reasonable likelihood of conviction at trial, being proven beyond a reasonable doubt, which is obviously much higher than just a probable cause determination. And that can be really challenging. Again, these cases are hard. So there's often times that I have to look at a victim after a case has hit my desk and say, I know this happened to you. I believe you. I'm so sorry. I can't prove this at court. And so it's definitely a challenge, but it takes a very large team effort.
Yeah.
Wow. So about a decade ago, a state audit found thousands of untested evidence kits in Bernalillo County, some of the cases dating back to the 80s. This accounts for a huge amount of the untested rape kits across New Mexico. Since then, the state's poured millions of dollars into addressing that backlog, and it has really made a dent. It's led to some convictions in some really old cases in the last few years here. We know that a lot of that backlog, though, was from the Albuquerque area as the biggest city in our state, but there are cases as well that are in your district in the Santa Fe area. Are those tests from in the backlog from the state level, is it still having an effect and ramifications? Are you still feeling ramifications of that backlog in the Santa Fe criminal justice community?
Sure, that's a great question. So as of right now, we don't have a backlog in Santa Fe in terms of old untested rape kits, at least that I'm aware of. Where the backlog or the lag right now is current testing times. So if a sexual assault kit gets submitted to the Department of Public Safety laboratory, it's taking over a year or longer to get those results back. And that's, I think, largely due to staffing at DPS, Department of Public Safety. My understanding is they have a lot of analysts that they're training right now, so hopefully we get some relief on that. But that's the biggest challenge in terms of kit testing. And we do have old cases that crop up where there's what's called a CODIS hit. Someone maybe gets arrested on a new offense, and then an old kit that has been tested that gets matched. And we have cold cases that do come in fairly frequently from those old kits that have already been tested.
And that's a national database, right?
Correct.
Okay. So we understand, staffing issues at the state's forensic lab are partly to blame for just that lack of timeliness in getting results back once a kit goes to the lab. Is there communication happening between like prosecutors and DPS and the state labs about like, can we get this quicker? What are those conversations like? What's happening there?
Sure. So we have access to a portal. I think it's called the BEAST system, where we can see if a case has been submitted or if a kit has been submitted and then what stage of testing it's in. And the testing process generally seems to go really quickly. The analysts at DPS are fabulous. They're so smart and so thorough. But once, if we're kind of bumping up on some deadlines, we can communicate with them and ask that testing be expedited. But, when everything is a rush, then nothing can be a priority. Mm-hmm. And so even when we're asking for expedited testing, that doesn't necessarily mean we get a quick turnaround. And then that can be frustrating for us and for the lab.
We understand there are more changes happening that will continue to affect this area, specifically the state Supreme Court. There's a proposed rule that would affect the 1st Judicial District, as I understand, that basically would change procedural elements in the way of trying to speed up these cases as they move through the trial process. So that, of course, is tied to the fact that we know people have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. But theoretically, if you're not getting that evidence back from a forensic lab fast enough and you don't have the results you really need to further prove the case and the allegations that you're making there, say if it's involving a rape or sexual assault case, what happens to those cases? Can they be thrown out for something that's sort of beyond your control in the lab's hands, really?
Oh, they absolutely can be thrown out. If we don't produce evidence by the timelines that are going to be set in those scheduling orders under the case management order, which is no longer proposed. It hits January 1st. And thankfully, my office has been working for the better part of 2 years to prepare on our side for that rule. But yeah, we're going to be under tight scientific evidence deadlines, and those deadlines may prohibit us from seeking additional testing of items. So, for example, in a sexual assault case, they test the rape kit first, the swabs taken from the survivor's body. Sometimes that doesn't have any evidence on it, and that, of course, does not mean an assault didn't occur. It's just there wasn't evidence to collect from that particular person. But maybe we have underwear or bed sheets, something that could be tested later. If we're waiting right up until the deadline to get our results from the rape kit, the sexual assault evidence kit, we may not have the opportunity to test those additional evidentiary items.
I think one point that is, I think, clear, correct me if I'm wrong, or important to make clear here, is that you can nully a case. You can drop it with the intent to refile it. And a case management order also happened in Bernalillo County. Certainly put a lot of pressure, I know, on that office to start moving things more quickly. So the cases can be refiled, but I would just ask you as a prosecutor, what's the harm in the fact that you have to wait so long to then maybe get refiled? Is it that maybe sometimes the victims say, you know what, I'm done with this process, or maybe it's the alleged perpetrator goes off maybe somewhere else because they're not facing any, threat to their freedom, so to speak.
Sure.
What is the harm of postponing cases?
So it is always better to launch a complete case from the get-go, and I think that's what we'll see under the case management order, is that it's we wait until we have as complete of a case as possible so that we don't have to dismiss and refile. There's the issues of losing witnesses, of people moving away. Even law enforcement officers, they get deployed, they move cross-country, whatever. It can be hard to get them back. People forget. Memories can change, and we have protocols and systems built in to help preserve those things. Right. But in an optimal scenario, you're taking one bite at this apple and then getting it across the finish line.
Yeah.
You mentioned it's taken over a year in some cases to get results back. What is an ideal timeline for a turnaround like that?
So, and it's actually taking over 2 years in some cases,
Wow.
which is, and that relates more to homicides. Sexual assault kits are supposed to be given priority by statute. They're supposed to be tested within 180 days. And overwhelmingly, we're not seeing that right now. And that's been that way for a couple of years. When I first started up in Santa Fe, the turnaround times were much quicker and much closer to that 180-day period. And I think that's just due to staffing at DPS.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA
has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
What types of evidence are the most crucial in cases like this? And does reporting it right away versus waiting ultimately matter?
That's a great question. So in every sexual assault case, or nearly every sexual assault case, the most important thing is the victim. We can go to trial on what a survivor tells us. People often hear of a he said, she said case and say, oh, that means that you can't move it forward. We can. I mean, if there is some other corroboration, if we can find enough to get us beyond a reasonable doubt, those cases can move forward. So a cooperative survivor is often the most crucial piece of evidence. Then, of course, you have DNA. Everyone hangs their hat on DNA, right? Ever since OJ, right? Everyone thinks DNA is the end-all, be-all. And sometimes we have that, and oftentimes we don't. There's limits to science. There's limits to what can be collected from different body parts, depending on circumstance. And so what we look for in a case, when possible, is any form of a micro-corroboration. So little details, little things, even if it's, say, the color of the paint on the walls in the room where it happened, right? There's something that helps corroborate what the survivor is telling law enforcement. And so those complete investigations that have all those micro corroborations can be really, really tight puzzles that we can present to a jury and really show them the full picture.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen that evolve over the years? It seems like, at least from a news standpoint, that cases like that, where you say, maybe you don't have all the DNA evidence, but you have testimony from victims coming forward. It seems like that is more common as of late.
Sure. So delayed disclosure, especially with children, is overwhelmingly the norm. And by delayed disclosure, I mean a child having gone through some sort of abusive event and then not telling for a period of time. With children, it's about 2 years, can be about average. So obviously 2 years later, you're not going to have DNA. You're not going to have injury. The vast majority of sexual assault examinations in children are normal anyway. And so that's where those other forms of corroboration can be key. Did she tell a friend about it? Did he talk to a different trusted adult who maybe didn't report? Did they move, but he can still describe this building he went to one time, or were there teachers who saw something and didn't report? Any of those corroborations can absolutely make a difference. Delayed disclosure is, as I said, extremely common. So I think as a child sex abuse prosecutor, we go into some of those cases knowing that we're not going to have the physical evidence that juries hang their hats on. We have experts then who can explain why that doesn't exist, but why that child should still be believed.
Okay. We've acknowledged, some of the challenges. There's also been some successes along the way. One case adjudicated in October, State versus Frankie Marquez. A Santa Fe jury convicted 34-year-old Frankie Marquez on 2 counts of raping a child under the age of 13. That case was filed in 2021, so more than 4 years later, you were able to secure that conviction. And when the conviction was granted, your office said, quote, convictions in cases of this nature depend on the courage of survivors who come forward. Talk to us about how that case played out. How were you ultimately able to win that case?
So that case is pending sentencing, so I should maybe speak in broader strokes. Cases involving young children who come forward are incredibly complex, and we depend on not just a child who can take the stand and confront their abuser and tell their story in a room full of strangers, which is daunting for an adult and can be overwhelming for a child. We rely on a full team, and so in cases where we have a sexual assault nurse examiner who can even just teach a jury about basic anatomy, things that we don't necessarily talk about day to day. Helping the jury kind of understand how different body parts work beyond what we learned in freshman health, however long ago. A member of law enforcement who can see a case through to the end, and in that case, we did have a member of a dedicated detective who helped us work that case so well, and then of course analysts like the Department of Public Safety, who can explain where DNA may or may not be present, the limits of science in kind of analyzing that DNA, and putting kind of different things in context, like can DNA be transferred, or how is DNA deposited, what are mixtures, things like that. So complex cases like that take a team effort. Obviously, as a prosecutor, it's our job to put all that together into a package for the jury to understand. But ultimately, it is a brave little girl or a brave little boy who has to go forward and tell their story, and then sometimes you hear the guilty verdicts as a result.
Wow. In cases like that, what is your decision maker on like whether or not to, to put a victim on a stand?
It's really a hard decision. I have had victims attempt suicide after a not guilty verdict, and that stays with you forever and can make you a little gun shy. So you really have to dig into your ethics on only bringing cases that have that reasonable likelihood of conviction at trial. I have looked at survivors and their parents before and said, look, I know that this happened. I can't in my core put you through this. It won't, it's not likely to go the way we want. And sometimes you have survivors who say, I know that this may not go the way I want. Can I move it forward? And if I think that ethically I can, then it's worth taking a stab at it.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, talk to us about the difference between like child sexual abuse cases when a child comes forward versus an adult.
Sure, they're very, very different. You would think they'd be the same, but children are not little adults, right? So we started off talking about how kids may recall differently. Kids delay the time period more often than not from when they tell someone. They disclose differently. They often will test the waters with a trusted adult before they tell kind of everything that happened, or they may kind of come up in an explosive event like a fight, and it just kind of comes out and comes pouring out. So children, just from the very beginning of a case, it all progresses in a different way, just based on their age and their development, and cultural and knowledge, and all sorts of factors. Mm-hmm. Juries have different standards and beliefs in kid cases versus adult cases, and not always, but some jurors may find children to be more credible, and they'll say, I don't care, if you have evidence or not, if a child says it happened, it happened. Maybe they're not the best juror, just as someone who says, I think every child's a liar. Juries hold adults to different standards. They may expect them to, recall more detail. They may have more stigmas or kind of taboos, feelings about, well, what was she wearing? Why was she walking home alone at night? Why didn't she report right away? Well, this was her boyfriend. Does she have other motives for fabricating or something like that? So juries, I do feel like, look at a child case versus an adult case through different lenses that require different experts or different explanations to help put the case together.
Interesting, yeah. And when you're talking to children about something as sensitive as this, I imagine it can be very emotional, probably for the parents also. How do you gauge, and people just might be curious about this, like, if you've watched documentaries or true crime, cases, how do you gauge when someone's telling the truth about a sexual assault?
So we have good data that children don't lie to get people in trouble. Generally, children lie to get someone out of trouble, to get themselves out of trouble. So when a child comes forward, usually and more often than not, sexual abuse involves a trusted person in their home, in their family, in their life. It's someone that they don't want to get in trouble. So that's kind of a interesting point that we're always keeping in mind. And parents often have their own motivations, but overwhelmingly most parents just want their kid to be safe. And these crimes devastate families. They bring up generational trauma. They bring up feelings of guilt or lack of protection. Maybe they didn't believe right away. So you are having to navigate a parent's own sense of maybe failure, probably misplaced, right? But their own sense of letting their child down, letting themselves down, and just the trauma and kind of devastation in all of this. Mm-hmm. It's a lot to navigate.
Yeah, it clearly is. And I'm thinking forward-looking, because obviously there are some challenges with, as we've talked about, getting evidence back in a timely fashion, bringing these important cases through to a conclusion, but not just for prosecutors, also for the labs that do the testing, the victims who come forward. What do you think, if anything, needs to happen over the next year, over 2026, for the system to better function, to better hold people accountable? Even if everything works, though, right, a case is not always going to get a conviction.
Sure, and the system only works if there's defense attorneys on the other side holding the state accountable, holding us to our burden. That is obviously something that is necessary for all of us, right? We all want those protections, and the system only functions that way. As we move forward, I think some of the important things there are more education in our communities. That's an easy one, about what to do if a child makes a disclosure. You start by believing, you report right away, you ask minimal questions, and you get them the help and protection they need and let the system progress. More support for survivors. I think a lot of people go into cases thinking, oh, my justice and my healing will be when I hear a guilty verdict. And really, I mean, sure, that may be the goal, but a very, very small percentage of cases that get reported. A smaller percentage make it through a probable cause determination. A smaller percentage make it through get to a jury trial, much less get through a jury trial with a conviction. So survivors need tools and resources to do the healing on their own and to find what their justice is in other realms, which just may be that a child is protected from further abuse from that perpetrator, or a family can confront their own intergenerational trauma and move forward. Of course, there's a number of legislative changes I have in my back pocket for my Christmas wish list. So if Santa's floating around, please let me hand those off. There's some things in some statutes that need to be cleaned up and modernized, particularly related to child sexual abuse material, also called child pornography. As AI becomes more prevalent, we probably need to address CSAM, and how that those things interplay, and that there's just some statutes that are outdated. Again, if any legislators are listening, please call me. I will give you a whole list.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I want to ask you while you're here, a table of parents. We've also, spoken to investigators who investigate crimes like this on this podcast, the FBI. And I always am curious too, with the knowledge that you have in your career, but also being a parent, what sort of protections do you take in your household, or even talking to your kid to keep them safe from things like this?
That's a great question. And there's some that are really easy. The first one is talking about genital anatomy. So I don't know how often you hear penis and vagina in this podcast room, but
probably never.
Probably
honestly.
never, right?
You might be the first.
That'll be my legacy. And again, my mom will be so proud. No, but using proper anatomical terms makes those body parts kind of demystified and less taboo and kind of dirty feeling. Yeah. So then if a child makes a disclosure, it's a lot easier for myself, for law enforcement, to understand where they were touched. If they say, he touched my vulva, he touched my vagina, versus he touched my cookie or my noni or my hoo-ha. So teaching children proper anatomical terms for both their front and their back privates, breasts, empowers them, makes them more likely to disclose, and helps them understand what's what and how things work. It'll impact them positively their whole life. The other thing is talking to your children about good touch, bad touch, and identifying who is allowed to help them, say, use the restroom or help them with their intimate parts. And then also identifying 2 or 3 trusted adults that aren't you, the parents, that they could talk to if anyone ever did touch them in a bad way. So usually, grandma, I would say at least 1 or 2 non-family members. So maybe a family friend, a teacher, and having that conversation of, if you didn't want to tell mom or dad, but someone was making you uncomfortable, let's identify 3 people that we know would believe and protect.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And at what age is all of this appropriate? Because we also know that, people are being targeted online now with kids having devices. We just had a conversation with my daughter the other day about, just the camera on the iPhone and things like that, and she's like, well, it's, in the house and there's a password on it. And I'm like, that doesn't mean that somebody else can't access this device.
Sure. I think these conversations should start as young as possible. My toddler knows what his penis is, and that's an important thing. It's easier if you start it young, but find a way to integrate it. It's never too late, and have those conversations, especially too as your children enter puberty, as they start talking to kids they may have romantic interests with and exploring their own sexual identity. Getting those lines of communication open early can be really helpful. Most people's pediatricians are really happy to give some pointers on that. So if you're kind of uncomfortable with that, talk to your doctor.
Yeah. Aside from reporting a sexual assault, if it happens to anybody who, may be listening to this interview, is there anything else that you would say to survivors or something that they should know about?
So to any survivors that are listening, let me say I'm so sorry for what you went through, and it is not your fault. And it will certainly be something that will probably always be with you to some degree. But what I tell, especially teens, over and over, and I've watched this play out as truth, at some point in your life, you will meet someone else who is a survivor, and that could be a college roommate. We know that 1 in 3 women is sexually assaulted. 1 in, I think it's 6 men. You will encounter someone who has just navigated that, and because of what you've survived, you will be able to help them. So it's unfortunate that you're in this situation, but it is an opportunity to be a hero to somebody else and know that you can be a helper. And when we go through anything traumatic, whether it's a school shooting or some sort of mass event, I always hear, you should look for the helpers. Try not to focus on the bad and look for the people on the sidelines that are trying to do good. And being a survivor is a real opportunity to help others. It doesn't have to be your identity, but you will encounter a situation where you can help someone heal and move forward as well.
We appreciate all your time here. Is there anything else that you would like to add, something that we're missing, something you want to help people better understand?
Sure. We are all mandatory reporters in the state of New Mexico. We all have a duty to keep our kids safe. So if you have any sort of suspicion of child sexual abuse or physical abuse or neglect, call law enforcement. You can also dial #SAFE, SAFE, to talk to statewide central intake through CYFD. Just because a report is made does not mean someone's life gets ruined, but it may save a life. And we ask that you do that.
Well, Haley Murphy, we appreciate the work you do. It sounds like it's heavy work. Not everybody is capable of probably taking in this information and advocating for the truth. And so we appreciate your work, and thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Haley Murphy for coming on our show and talking to us about what I think is a difficult topic. Like we were saying, we've interviewed so many people, different careers, and sometimes I just think to myself, like, man, I could not do your job, but I'm glad that she can.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear that kind of background about just how many other people they rely on to make sure those cases can get through the finish line. Also, the issue with the labs that they're certainly facing, that there is a backlog of testing. So that is indeed why some of these criminal cases take so long to prosecute.
Well, yeah, the timelines of getting those back from the lab. It sounds like they've dealt with that, but man, waiting a year, 2 years for evidence, that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, still quite a wait.
We'll continue to cover, issues like this, but if there's anything that you'd like to hear about on our podcast or someone you'd like to hear from, let us know. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email, ngburknm on social media.
I'm at Chris McKee TV, also Chris.McKee@krqe.com. Thanks for watching and listening.